Welcome to Chautauqua People. I'm John V. My guest today is Emilia Metterbrink, who is a fellow with the Chautauqua Symphony Orchestra. She's a native of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and began studying the violin at age 3, following the Suzuki method with a private teacher. She was sent to higher levels of instruction as was appropriate, subsequently earning her doing undergraduate work at University of Michigan and earning a Master of Music at the University of Wisconsin. She participated in the Aspen Summer Music Festival during her student years. She has served as the assistant concertmaster for the Madison Symphony and played for the Wisconsin Chamber Orchestra. She was selected by audition for the New World Symphony Orchestra, led by Michael Tilson Thomas in Miami Beach, Florida. Emile, how did you come to the violin at such a young age?
My mother started me on the violin. She was in a babysitting co-op of mothers in the city, and one of the other moms had a youngster about 2 or 3 years older than me that was also studying violin. And this mother said, it's a great way to get brain development and develop math skills and all kinds of things. So my mom kind of threw me in, not knowing much.
And so you played these simple little tunes then at age 3 and moved along.
Mm-hmm.
Now tell me about the violin which you currently play.
My violin is an old Italian instrument. It's labeled as a Storioni, but they can't quite prove that is absolutely true. So I was able to purchase it for a little bit less than it would otherwise have been valued at, and I purchased it during my master's degree as my professional instrument.
So what age is the best guess for it?
1780s, they think.
Wow.
Old Italian, yeah.
And so it's been used
Yes.
continuously since then.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how do you go about selecting a violin?
Well, it's like selecting a best friend, I think. It's the instrument, it's the thing you're going to be with for many hours out of every day, and so you have to try a whole lot of them to find the right one, the one that works with your specific way of playing. The instrument that I play on, probably others wouldn't choose first because it's perfect for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a unique relationship. I tried, I don't even know, it took me about 1.5 years to find an instrument. I went to many different dealers and private people who were selling their instruments to see which one would be right for me. I played it for my teacher, I played it for friends, I played it in halls and in small recital studios, and just finally came to one that I didn't want to give back, and that's when I knew that one had to be mine.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you care for that instrument?
Well, it's my baby. It's my best friend. So it's treated with the utmost care. Day-to-day use means that I have to change the strings about every 2 months, depending on how much use I'm getting. I use specific strings, so I have to go to a shop to get those strings, and then I also change the hair on my bow about every 2 to 3 months, depending on use again. And then I get it serviced, I guess that's the right word to use, twice a year by a professional luthier in Minneapolis and St. Paul who specializes in the little tweaks, or if there happens to be an open seam because of the changes in temperature, humidity that might happen throughout the year for an instrument.
Mm-hmm. As a brass player, that's a term I didn't know. Luthier?
Luthier. So Luthier, luthier.
Okay.
And based on lute, the old instrument, and just someone who knows the craft of making and supporting the health of stringed instruments. So a luthier would be good at, they might specialize in violins, but they often are good at all the stringed instruments. There's a separate person that you would go to for your bow usually, but they specialize in.
So when you travel, what do you do with the violin?
Well, I have a travel case that's lighter than the case I might use at home in the wintertime when it's cold in Minnesota. But my travel case has locks on it, so no one can open my instrument at the airport except for me, and it's wrapped up in a cloth so that it doesn't move around inside the case, and I just try to keep my big game face on at the airport, and in case security wants to take a closer look, it's just my responsibility to make sure they handle it with care.
And you probably don't want TSA people touching it.
No, I usually, that's why I lock it, so then if they, as it goes through the detector, if they need to take a closer look for any reason, they can't open it before I arrive to show them how to handle it, and I take the violin out and explain to them what it is. And
Indeed, and I hope they're cooperative.
yes, actually the rules have gotten better, and TSA agents are now pretty well versed in what they are and how to handle them, so it's actually much better than it used to be. Things have gotten better since travel restrictions have gotten tighter.
One travel question I can't resist. You're up in the cold upper Midwest.
Yes.
You're making a long trip. What's the routine?
With the violin, like in the car or something?
Yeah.
Or if I'm traveling in the car has to be warm before the instrument gets into the car with me. So
Really? So they warm the car up and then come up with the violin.
I warm the car up because it doesn't take much of a temperature differential. Like if it goes from my warm apartment that's 72 degrees hopefully, and gets down into the negative temperatures in Minnesota in the middle of winter, that would be really bad for an old piece of wood to experience. So yeah, as little time in the outside air as possible. The case is protective against the elements to some extent, but usually anything more than 5 minutes and my violin would become at risk.
Whoa. And so you probably leave it in the house when you have to gas up the car, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And if you go in someplace to get a meal,
it comes with me.
it comes with you.
Yeah, just as any of my children or my dog, nothing stays in the car that's valuable to me.
Right. Let's switch gears a little bit. And I wonder if you could tell me what the practice schedule is like for members of the CSO. And most of our viewers have no idea.
Well, as a violinist, it's a little more complicated than it is for the rest of the string section in that as one of the fellows, we may sit, the violin fellows might sit in the first violins or in the second violins. So depending on the concert we're playing, we have to check the list and see where we're sitting so that we know what part to pick up to practice. And then our first job at the beginning of the season is to see those concerts that we feel like are going to be challenging, pick that music up first and learn those parts if we can. We usually get seating charts about a week in advance of the program, so that's when we can start preparing. Any of the rest of the members of the orchestra could have those parts a little bit sooner based on the fact that they would know where they're sitting no matter what. And then you practice your own part, and then you come to rehearsal. We usually have one rehearsal per concert that we're playing. So if there's a Tuesday night concert, we're rehearsing on Tuesday afternoon. Occasionally, if a guest artist has requested more than one rehearsal, or for the operas, there is more than one rehearsal for that concert. For a symphony orchestra concert without opera involved, there's never more than 2 rehearsals. So we have up to 4 different programs in any given week. So it's a fast turnaround. So I may be practicing on Tuesday morning for the Tuesday afternoon rehearsal. Between the rehearsal and the concert, I may practice the music for Wednesday, which will be different, and then play the concert that night, go home, get a good night's sleep, and do the whole thing again the next day.
Goodness. Now, how does this compare with the pace of, let's say, a major orchestra? I'm just going local here, Buffalo or Rochester or Cleveland.
Well, the biggest difference, I would say, is not the number of services or hours you're with your instrument, but the variety of music that you have to cover within any given week. So usually, and there are exceptions, but usually with Buffalo or Philharmonic or the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra, there would be one program that they would perform probably Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday matinee, and they would prepare with 4 rehearsals two on Tuesday, two on Wednesday, and maybe a dress rehearsal on Thursday morning, or a coffee concert if they do that type of thing. But all of that would be on the same program. There may be instances in which they involve an additional Pops concert, or maybe they're doing a Harry Potter at Christmas time, where you would have one additional concert in that week that was different from that major program. You might have some children's activities or school out in the school programs that would be just bits and pieces of your larger program. But the amount of repertoire that the Chautauqua Symphony Orchestra does in 1 week is much larger than a normal week at the New York Philharmonic would ever be.
Mm-hmm. And so you have to learn more music, and does that presumably require more practice time in the lab?
Yes, more hours by yourself for sure, and the ability to quickly switch gears from one thing to the next, because we're on to the next thing within a moment's notice.
So would you spend more time with the violin in hands here than you might during a week in the symphony?
I can imagine that there are weeks that, yes. There was a couple weeks out here that I can think of that I spent more time with my instrument than I even thought was possible.
Right.
All of it necessary to get ready for the rehearsals, but also just having to be very careful that I don't fatigue my mind or my body or my muscles to the point where I'm not able to execute when I need to on stage during the concert.
Now, are string musicians at risk for injury with all these performances?
Sure. Small muscle use in our hands, our wrists, our elbows, even our shoulders can lead to tendinitis. If you are not set up exactly correctly, or just overuse, just like a tennis player can overuse a forearm or a backswing, that the same thing can happen on our tools, because indeed we are athletes using muscles all the time. So yeah, it's common to have at least a little bit of pain, and hopefully you manage that pain, or you know how to properly stretch, warm up, warm down, just like any other athlete would as they prepare for a race, which is basically what we do.
So is that fair to think of a string musician as an athlete?
I do. I think of all of us on stage as athletes. There's definitely a level of cardiovascular activity that goes into what we are doing, and not just the mental gymnastics of listening and looking and feeling the music of those around you, but physically we are tasked with extremely difficult things, and that involve both muscle memory and large and small muscle movement. So yeah, it is possible to injure quite easily.
Do symphony musicians then have a higher rate of disability in old age?
I don't know that it's higher than the general public or just different, but I do know that it can end your career sooner than you want it to if you don't properly take care of yourself. I know members of my home orchestra, Minnesota Orchestra, that wish they were still playing, but instead are retired because they had to have major surgery on their shoulder that didn't solve a problem, or their rotator cuff is so depleted over time that they can no longer do what they love.
Emilia, I just never, prior to this discussion, never would have thought that was a situation for musicians. I'm so glad you're here to share it with us. And I think we talked earlier about some professional athletes who then are at much higher risk in some sports for such injury, which is understandable. Now, when are musicians taught to take a break?
Not enough, probably. Excuse me. Not enough, probably. I think that many musicians grow up thinking you just continue playing because the craft is more important. The art, the execution of this beautiful thing is more important than your physical form or how you're getting it done.
And so you keep making music regardless of your well-being and basically gut it out.
it's possible to do so. And I think a lot of us are trained more as to the work hard aspect rather than the take care of yourself aspect. I had a very important teacher when I was young stop me during a lesson, explain that I was doing something that would eventually hurt my body, although, you know, as a young person, nothing hurts. And she said, and if it does hurt when you practice, you need to stop and take a break until it doesn't hurt anymore, because playing the violin should not hurt you.
Wow.
And it was a very important piece of advice for me, and something that I've carried through my adult life. Because when you're practicing something new and you're trying to make a specific technique work on your body, which is different than someone, you know, my hands are not the same size as Gil Shaham's or Yitzhak Perelman, but we are tasked with the same notes to learn. And fitting that into my form can sometimes make me do things that are not comfortable on my body before I find something that is comfortable and possible.
You know, the bowing is prescribed, usually by, I understand, by the conductor, and then it works its way through the concertmaster and onto your music. Do you have any flexibility then if you're hurt? Position a little bit differently, or?
Well, bowing is an interesting thing because it's you do what you're told, you know, what's on the page. In rehearsals, I guess audience members don't know this, but Rossen and all conductors are known to say, you know, take it easy right now because we have a concert tonight. So the brass players will lay off the big notes and not use their embouchures to their full extent. And the string players might not do a technique if there's a lot of tremolo in a piece. Let's see, composers that use that a lot, like Berlioz, and a lot of the big works, you're just running your arm very quickly across the instrument. And if you do that a lot, it can be taxing. So there are moments in which a conductor hopefully would tell the members of the orchestra during rehearsal, like, save it for the concert.
Got it.
So that's ways in which we all help each other out to not burn out too soon on any given day. And then you may choose the way in which I play my instrument might look slightly different than the way someone else plays the instrument. I may use the same bowings, as I'm told, but the way I execute, how I make the best sound, may actually be a different physical movement than the next person. And that's to keep us all healthy. Hopefully, you're doing something that doesn't hurt you.
Right. Now, when you've been asked to fill in for a violinist on sick leave, what's the most common reason for that person's absence?
They hurt themselves. It's not that they're sick, they're not out with a cold. For the most part, it's because they are physically in pain to the point where they can't play.
That's a big deal. Now, do you teach violin?
No, I don't. I teach yoga. About 12 years ago, when I moved back to Minneapolis from New World, I decided that I really wanted to study yoga, and the best way to do that as someone who wasn't making a lot of money was to help out at a studio where I wanted to take lessons. And so they ended up saying, hey, we really think we'd like you to go through teacher training. And I said, okay. And then 12 years later, here I am teaching yoga, but it has been both a balance physically and mentally for the taxing job of being a professional musician. So yeah, it's been really beneficial to my life.
What kind of music do you play during yoga?
All types. I've been known to start my yoga classes by saying, listen, I am a classically trained violinist, so if you hear a classical song in your class, that's the reason. If you don't like classical music, it's probably just going to be one song, so don't worry. And if you do like classical music, you can come take my class a lot because you'll hear that again. But I also play hip-hop, I play jazz, I play new age, I play country music. I've been known to play some of my own stuff when I come off of tour, and I have new things to share with my students, and I think some of them come to my class so that they can hear what I'm up to. I'm a girl who goes down the rabbit hole every once in a while when I hear a new piece of music that I like, and
sit in with iTunes at night and just have iTunes say, oh, if you like that piece, you might like this piece. And I just follow that as far down the road as I'll go. Sometimes I lose sleep over it, but I love good musicians of all kinds, so I seek it out.
Well, I think that's one of the fun things about Chautauqua. We get introduced to so much new music. Horn piece this week that was fun.
Oh, yes.
And so I will seek that out someplace and have another listen. Let's change gears a little bit. Now, you gained a seat in the New World Symphony by going through an audition procedure. What was that like, and can you talk me through that and maybe some of the union standards for auditions? I think most of our viewers are just unfamiliar with that.
So yeah, I can even relate it to your own Chautauqua Symphony Orchestra because you just gained two violists this summer through an audition process. One of them was one of the diversity fellows, one of my friends. So the auditions are always done behind a screen. There are multiple rounds. So there's usually a preliminary, a semifinal, and a final. There may be some kind of super final if they can't decide between 2 or 3 people. But before the audition even happens, you have to send your resume into the symphony orchestra. They will either say, we think you're qualified to take the audition, please, and they invite you, or they need you maybe to send a tape round. They want to hear an example of your playing before they even hear a preliminary audition. Once you're invited to the preliminaries, they will send along a list to all the candidates of excerpts, and they usually are excerpts from your solo repertoire, some kind of concerto of your instrument, and then excerpts from the standard repertoire of symphonies and what have you from the normal so Mozart and John Williams has become very common on audition lists because Harry Potter is played a lot now, but everything in between. And you prepare those, sometimes up to 20 excerpts, and then you show up on the audition the preliminary day, and they will have a shortened list from that larger list of things that they want to hear on that day. And as they listen to candidates, they will whittle down who they want to hear again. And you either get a yes or a no, and you either go home or they want to see you tomorrow or later that day, depending on when their semifinal round is, and they'll whittle it down during the semifinals to a final group. At some point, it is still common for the screen to come down at some point. They may do anything from just a normal playing of the final round, some of the repertoire you've already played that day or the previous day or something new. Or they may decide that, we like 2 candidates and we'd really like to have them come and do trial weeks with the orchestra. Some of those people have done that this summer. There's an opening in the oboe section of the symphony right now, and there's, I believe, also something in the trumpets. So they've had what they call trial weeks for those musicians who are well qualified and they're trying to make final decisions. Or they may hire someone outright, and then they would go through the probationary period before they receive tenure. And tenure periods vary through a symphony orchestras from 1 to 2 years, usually on the outs, maybe 3.
So you're on probation for those first few years. And then how do they make the final decision?
Well, you have a tenure review committee, much like if you were a professor at an institution of learning. Your review committee will meet with you throughout your years of probation and tell you this is what's working, this is what's not working, this is what we think you need to work on as we move forward, so that process is hopefully, at least they're giving you the information you need to do the job well. And then in conversation with the principal conductor, the committee will make a decision, and it's a yes or a no. They can speed up that process if they want to. They could say, we're going to give you early tenure, or they can delay it if they want to, but there are always rules within any collective bargaining agreement within the orchestra to decide how that's done and what their policy is.
Okay. Now, those are then basically the standards laid out customarily by a union, and they're pasted typically into the contract without a lot of, presumably without a lot of change. Am I adding too much here?
Well, so the AFM, the American Federation of Musicians, has some guidelines about auditions. Then every local union will have maybe some additional guidelines for their city. And then in addition to that, every symphony orchestra will have a collective bargaining agreement, which includes their procedure on how they run auditions and how long their 10-year period is and what that 10-year period looks like. And those, usually a collective bargaining agreement for a symphony orchestra is about 5 years long. That's pretty typical. They can be shorter, they can be longer. So the orchestra committee will get to look at those rules that they've set forth every 5 to 10 years and say, this is working for us, this isn't working, we'd like to change these things about this process. And they would present that to management and they would come to an agreement.
Now, if we see agreements being negotiated post-COVID, have they changed substantially? And what management is asking for?
There's a lot of COVID policies that are in there now that of course, were not even thought of before. Vaccine stipulations or mask mandates throughout the orchestra, or how the symphony is going to run. I know I play with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra in Minneapolis, or in St. Paul, Minnesota, and right now they have a policy of testing once a week. So we go in and we get a test before we come to our first rehearsal, and then right before our first concert at the end of the week again. And that's just something you do if you want to play with that orchestra. And that's us. I think it's in their side letter. I'm not sure it's in their collective bargaining agreement, but definitely there have been extra add-ons since COVID that involve everything from force majeure to, what do we do when someone gets sick? And
those are not very pleasant, but indeed seem to be
we've
reasonable.
found that they're necessary, yeah.
And
the orchestra needs to be healthy. We're pretty close on stage, and so to have something that protects us, to take the time we need when we are sick, to step away and not have it ruin our career, but then also protects everyone else on stage, so we're not having people come in sick and choose to play anyways. I mean, brass players who blow through big pieces of metal, we don't want them blowing COVID onto the rest of the orchestra, and it would just be unwise to do those things. So yeah, we try and keep each other safe and respect one another on stage.
okay, I got a couple more pesky questions.
Yes.
Something I read about called a tiny balcony concert.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Tell me what a tiny balcony concert is.
So when the pandemic began, I was at home, just had come back from a tour with a traveling orchestra. And the opera had one rehearsal, and then they canceled the rest of the season. And it was like overnight, everything just disappeared. And all of my colleagues in the arts will tell you that's exactly what happened. Just the next 4 days of my life were just email after email after email of, this is canceled, we won't need you, this is canceled, you're not gonna get paid. Just my life fell apart on paper right before my eyes. And I found myself sitting on the couch doing nothing and not knowing how I was gonna live or how long this was gonna last. And as my partner was working from home comfortably teaching Zoom lessons to his college students, I was just kind of, oh my goodness, what's gonna happen next? So about 3 weeks in, I said to myself, this isn't gonna work. I can't just sit around and do nothing. I had gone through a pretty debilitating illness that wasn't COVID. And as my hearing was coming back, I decided I need to know if I can play the violin after all this struggle period. And what's it going to feel like? What is this going to look like moving forward? We happened to have, my partner and I, this tiny little balcony on our third floor condo in St. Paul, and I just walked out at 6 p.m. I called my next door neighbor. I said, I'm going to walk outside and I'm going to play a Bach sonata. And then I'm going to walk back in and I just want to know that I can still play because I haven't played in 3 weeks. And I did. Some neighbors stopped and listened for 5 minutes, and then I walked back inside, and I thought that was the end of it. And I got a text message on one of those social media platforms that evening, Nextdoor. It's like in the city, we have these neighborhood apps so you can keep track of your neighborhood. Anyway, someone texted me and said, I think it was you. You were out on your balcony and playing the violin. Please, please, please do it again. And I said, okay. So the next night at 6 p.m., I posted on my social media page, I'm going to do this for the next couple nights. We're just going to walk outside at 6 o'clock and I'll play. It'll be 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the most, and then that'll be it. And for a little while, I just did exactly that. I didn't talk, I didn't do anything, and then crowds started to show up. It was kind of something that was going on. So I made a Facebook page, and I started talking to my audience and kind of telling them who I was and what I was doing. And eventually it grew into a concert series. By the end of the summer, my best friend, who is the owner of a ballet company in the Twin Cities, did a version of Swan Lake on my front steps, and I played the music from my balcony, and that was super fun. And we raised a bunch of money for her organization and for me, that I was on unemployment and unable to go back to work. And then they wanted a second season, so after the snow started falling, I applied for a grant to get a second season together, and here we are 3 years later, and I do small concerts on my balcony.
That's great. That's great. Okay, one last question. We're out of time, but I can't resist. And we think of Chautauqua as being a great educational setting for young people. Young person comes to you, expresses an interest in becoming a performance musician. What would your advice be?
Don't let anybody tell you that's the wrong way to do it. Whatever it is that you're doing, if you're expressing yourself through music and you're enjoying yourself, there's probably an avenue out there for you to become gainfully employed. It doesn't have to look like a symphony orchestra. You don't have to be a soloist. You can do studio work. You can play in a band. You can teach. You can play live from your balcony. You can move to LA and play for commercials. You can go overseas and play in a chamber ensemble. There's so many ways to be a professional musician these days that I wish someone had told me sooner to just, whatever makes you happy, do it. Because I would have become an opera musician sooner, and I would have gone into chamber music sooner instead of seeking out a big, huge symphony orchestra job that wasn't quite the right fit for me. Yeah, and there's just tons of ways. So just don't let anybody else tell you how to do it. Make your own path.
This is great. This has been fun, and do come back.
Of course.
By all means.
Thank you so much.